Coming up this week on the Markcast. Well, the alternative football landscape is kind of like being stranded on a desert island, lack of supplies, warring factions, you name it. But when the XFL and the USFL are coming together with the intent to merge with the new presumed United Football League, is this the last grasp for the current state of alternative football? Without the XFL and the USFL working together, will they die alone? Cue your inner Jack Shepherd. It's time to go back to the island.
But if we can't live together, we're going to die alone.
Great show this week, joined by a longtime friend of the podcast, USFL and alternative football historian Paul Reeths. We are talking the newly acquired United Football League trademark from the XFL, as well as getting Paul's thoughts on the current landscape of alternative football with the impending merger.
I think that this is the attempt, for probably a decade, that if this doesn't work, that it will be very difficult to have real money jump back into this and fund an alternative league. So yeah, absolutely, that this probably needs to work, or it's just not going to work for a while.
Then lots of CFL stuff to talk about this week. Jamie Nye of the Green Zone up in Saskatchewan joining us, talking the Riders' woes in the CFL 2023 season, as well as sharing his thoughts on everything CFL Week 20.
They're done. They're done with this team. They're done with the coaching staff. They're done with the general manager. They're done. They're done. Some people don't even want them to make the playoffs. That's how done they are. Then this is the second straight year. It's absolutely Groundhog's Day for the Roughriders to go 6-5 and then lose 7 straight last year, and now could lose 7 straight this year if they lose to the Toronto Argonauts on Saturday.
And then Gord Randall of Krown Gridiron Nation joining us again. We're talking America's CFL team, the BC Lions, the entire CFL West Division, playoff matchups, and more.
I question whether Chris Jones is going to be able to put it all together, because so far as a head coach, he hasn't. As a coordinator, he has. As a head coach, he has not. And so that's where I wonder about things, because his tenure as a head coach, whether in Saskatchewan or here in Edmonton, has been marred by questionable personnel decisions, has been marred by, at times, controversy. It hasn't been great. And I just don't know if he's the guy to get that job done.
Should be a good one. Like and subscribe. Hey guys, welcome to the Markcast. Reed here. Not too many years ago, Lost was literally the biggest thing in the history of the world. Really seemed to fall off. I can't figure out a bigger drop off from season finale till now, Game of Thrones or Lost, but we are talking staying together, living together, not dying alone today. Jack Shepherd, Matthew Fox, a star of that program. Big part of my life going through college. So always happy to get a throwback with that today. Lots of stuff to get into. We'll keep this short. We're talking with Paul Reeths, like I said, with OurSports Central. Paul, notable USFL historian, alternative football historian, wanted to get Paul's thoughts on kind of the new trademarks this week with the UFL. Does he think, we're bringing teams from the UFL, which we're not, but getting Paul's thoughts on that. What does he make of the XFL and USFL wanting to work together to merge? Lots of good stuff with Paul. And then a double trouble CFL guest this week with Jamie Nye. Appreciate him taking time after work up in Saskatchewan. And then Gord Randall making time during work. Really appreciate that. Talking CFL Week 20 and getting into a lot more of the playoff stuff, off-season stuff. Lots to get into there. A little bit of a sleepy weekend with the 3 games, but should be exciting nonetheless. So hope you guys enjoy. I think that will do it for me today. We will see you at the end. Thanks as always. Like and subscribe. Well, I appreciate it. Back here, trying to remember the last time we had Paul Reeths on. We've had a lot of new subscribers join just kind of during all of this, shenanigans with the United Football League, National String Football League kind of merger stuff. Paul is our resident USFL historian, alt football historian, runs OurSports Central, written a book about the USFL. Anything else just kind of set the context, because I think you're a unique guest to get on here to talk about this stuff.
So for those who aren't familiar with OurSports Central, we cover minor league sports, essentially. So everything below the big 4 professional sports leagues. And so over the years, we've kept an eye on all the XFLs and the new USFL, the United Football League, all of those. So those have all been in our purview over the years.
So, we've gone through a lot of this, and obviously we've shared our qualms about the USFL and everything. What did, and the XFL to that regard, but when you heard all this, XFL reaching out, USFL merging together here, intent to merge, what did you make of that here after the first season of the XFL?
It's kind of funny. I kind of flash back to a conversation that we had earlier before the XFL season started, and how much I remember having to pull the reins back on don't talk about merger, don't talk about potential merger, because I think so many of us had that kind of out in the distance. We thought, eventually this is the way that this is almost going to have to go. It doesn't make a lot of sense for these leagues to be competing against each other for not the largest audience out there. So no surprise at all that it happened. These things tend to be quiet until there's actually a lot of force behind what's going on. And that's exactly what we saw happen.
Were you surprised that it happened so quickly in terms of, the Forbes report comes out, XFL losing money, Daryl Johnston coming out saying we were disappointed with everything season 2? I mean, because to me, this, the quickness of this doesn't speak to both of these leagues. Were tremendously excited with how, season 2 of the USFL and season 1 of the XFL turned out.
And I looked at that Forbes report a lot differently than a lot of other people did. When I saw $60 million in losses, I thought, oh my goodness, I really thought it was going to be $100 million. For them to have done that well, I was a little bit surprised. We saw the erosion of the USFL's TV rating, so I was not, particularly surprised to see that they were looking for a different answer. And we'll see how much the XFL actually contributed to that, or if the USFL had picked up a lot of initial interest just based on curiosity, and that wasn't necessarily there in year 2 anymore. The USFL, I think they put together a better TV product in year 2 because they had a few more crowds, and yet that didn't translate in the ratings, which is what's really important to Fox. So we'll see what they do as far as the merger, and I do hope that we see kind of the best of both worlds, so the best that each league has to offer.
I guess I would love to be a fly on the wall here in some of these rooms with these executives of what were your expectations going in? What did you think? Because, and I've told this story before on here. I remember the first time Paul and I, XFL, episode 1, I'm like, we're going to put this on YouTube, man. We're going to all these people are going to be watching. And you're like, it's not, and I try to talk to people now and they're like, well, okay, what do you do? And I'm like, well, it's really niche and we're really good in our space, but it's such a minute thing. And I'm just curious, because I've heard people talk, XFL ticket people, pre all this stuff, oh yeah, we're going to be a top 5, 6, 7 league here in terms of selling tickets. And you're like, okay, well, what's realistic? Does it strike you that maybe Redbird got a little bit of cold feet here and that's why we're moving in this direction?
I honestly did not really believe that Redbird was in it for the long haul. I think that they flip. And so they saw an opportunity. They reached out. I had somebody who is familiar with both organizations, both Redbird and Fox. And he had told me months ago, you better believe he's reached out already to Fox. So it wasn't particularly surprising to me that was, Redbird was bankrolling the XFL. The Rock and Danny Garcia had, huge management roles to play. And so they did a lot of the day-to-day things, but Redbird was the money behind the league. And so really it was going to go as far as Redbird was willing to go. And I think as soon as they saw an opportunity to turn this around, to maybe make a little bit of money, or possibly even just stem the losses. Maybe they didn't see an end to the losses as quickly as they had hoped, that they took it.
I want to we're rehashing a little bit of the conversations we've had the last couple of weeks because I want to get your take on it. And then obviously we'll transition here into kind of the trademarks and just kind of the weird like repeating history that is all this. But, we've had conversations the last couple of weeks about dragging the audience outright, asking them for a lot of patience. Here, you've followed all of these, and the XFL 01 to 2020. Like it feels to me like, okay, we're just handing this off now. We're kind of done with this, moving this on. In terms of the alt football fan, like how strenuous is this to kind of live through this world like that?
This is what we signed up for.
Wow.
We've done this before, and I look back at when the USFL was folding. They have this lawsuit going on. Okay, we have a lot of hopes on the lawsuit. We have a fall season scheduled, and all of it ended up deteriorating. And we've seen XFL, they get out of that first year. The TV ratings were relatively horrible in 2001, but everything else is ready to go. We're ready to go. We're ready to go with our cable partners, and all of a sudden NBC pulls the plug. League's dead. And the NFL Europe, the World League, 2 years in the US, it's dead. Then the World League, we switch commissioners, it's dead. So, we've seen this. It seems to be a never-ending list of things that will kill these leagues, or at least fundamentally change them. It's part of the deal.
We've talked on here, and the theme of the episode this week is kind of die apart, or it's from Lost. It's live together, die apart, or whatever. And we've talked on here, at this time where we had two competing leagues, right? This is kind of the greatest chance, right, for any of these to work, where you have Fox owning all this, doing all that, and then Redbird, like we've talked, all the money. Now them already coming together, like, is this kind of the last frontier for this time period we're in? Like, if this doesn't work, is there any circumstance you can see where this is actually pans out in the future?
It's going to be a while. I think that this is the attempt, for probably a decade, that if this doesn't work, that it will be very difficult to have real money jump back into this and fund an alternative league. So yeah, absolutely, that this probably needs to work, or it's just not going to work for a while. And you would have to look at some fundamental changes probably in the media landscape and how they're able to monetize viewers behind a television or a screen somewhere. So you'll have to see some continued evolution of how they're able to monetize that.
Because to me here, if you're an outsider looking at this, and like I said, Fox is set up for this. It's filler content. They're able to write off a lot of the things, like where the ultimate goal of these, and we even had Ben Fisher reporting even last week, like the goal is still to sell these franchises off, right? And I think 3 to 4 years now. It was originally 7 years. Like, if I'm sitting there, like, why would I ever, like, you guys can't even get through a season, 2 seasons, like this is a huge next step.
Well, and I think what makes it particularly challenging from an investment perspective is that as an investor, what kind of say, what kind of input are you going to have? You're always going to be outvoted by Fox. So what exactly, what is your control? What is your influence? Otherwise, you're just giving money away in an obvious attempt to look like a local big shot. And that's really the only thing that's going to be on the line there. So I think it's a hard sell unless you're willing to give up some control.
It feels very much like the CFL in that regard of like, hey, I own the sports team. I'm going to own it for 15, 20 years until I get tired of it, or 2 to 5, whatever, and then kind of pass it on. I just, all of this, I don't know, is this giving you, and I know, like you said, we lived through all this, and you lived through this longer than any of us probably listening to the program here, but does this give you pause? Like, maybe this isn't the right space for these leagues to try to operate? Like, maybe there does need to be kind of change here?
Yeah, and it's such a weird thing is that we were kind of blessed with 2 leagues and all these games going on and year-round football for a year. And you do wonder if there was a way for these parties to come together at the very beginning and come into this past season with all of their resources dedicated to one project. If maybe we'd be in a better spot. So I'm kind of the eternal optimist here, where it's like, okay, well, maybe this could still work in some way, if the chips fall correctly. So, I don't know that I think there'll be somebody else who takes a flyer on it in the future if this doesn't work out. And I don't want to sound too fatalistic. We don't know if it'll work out or not. Certainly it's an uphill climb. Not all the details have been worked out or at least announced yet. So, there's a lot that we have to see, and maybe we'll come out in the next few weeks and we'll say, wow, this does look a lot better. They are leveraging their strengths. We'll see.
Because we've really tried to avoid on here, like, okay, is it going to be this or that? Because there's a million different kind of, okay, it's going to be the XFL conference and the whatever. But whatever happens, the idea of having, a 16 team, combination of resources here and everyone in their market, like, seems, far from whatever this is actually going to look like. Do you sense, for the fan bases, to me, to me, it's probably 8-2 people, negative about it to positive of, okay, this is a step back no matter what, or I have a team in Seattle. I don't know. Like, how are you viewing kind of this addition by subtraction moving forward with whatever it'll look like?
Well, I think you have to look at it from the perspective of both leagues. So, obviously we've already talked about Redbird Capital and whether it be kind of an opportunity they saw or cold feet. It doesn't look like they were in it for the long haul. So the XFL was going to be out of options sooner rather than later. You look at the USFL, there's only one reason that they even listen to the XFL. And I'll let the audience figure that out. You can believe what's been said online, you can believe the corporate talk, or you can look at what's actually happening. They listen to the XFL. Why? All right, so they need something. And so it's an opportunity for them to work together. I think this was probably the path forward, from day one, that this was almost inevitable. Now it's just a lot of push and pull, and we'll see which business plan they're going to pursue, or if it's a mix, or, I think that both teams brought some things to the table, and I'm hoping that they are able to pick out the best of the bunch. And we've talked many times in the past that we like seeing football in front of crowds. It just brings an extra element to the game and to the entertainment value of the television product. And so, I think that the thing that gives most XFL fans pause is talk about continued hubs and games in front of next to nobody. And I guess to a degree, I don't understand the love affair with Canton, Ohio. It's a great stadium, but it's not a big market. So you're only going to have a handful of thousand people there at best. It's cheap. Okay, well, so is the local high school field here. Why aren't we playing there? I'm really hopeful that they will pick out the best, no matter who ends up having control of this product.
Yeah, I've heard mixed, stuff coming from, inside the league, outside the league of, okay, well, no, you can look and see, like, there are things that we're doing better or things that they're doing better. I think there's an ideal world where that works. I guess to me is just, and you're an entrepreneur, right? I'm like that. There has to be some level of risk associated with starting one of these, right? And to me, like, I took out a loan when I started my video company and bought cameras and everything. Like, and you've lived through the history of this, right? Numerous times of this, people jumping in, I guess, not understanding the risk or not understanding the cost. Vince McMahon was bleeding money back in 2020, even before COVID and everything. Like, does it surprise you that this, like, we're so willing to jump in and maybe not even realize what the risk that we have with these leagues?
To me, that's the heartening thing, is that we see people of substance, corporations of substance, who are jumping into this weird alternative pro football universe. When people like Redbird Capital and Fox even make the attempt, there's something that they see that potential, they see the value of building an asset, and in Fox's circumstance, you can see how ESPN is struggling with it's rights fees payments, just like every broadcaster is. They're shelling out billions of dollars in rights fees. Well, Fox looks at that and says, well, if we can develop our own thing that can draw ratings, and we never have to shell out rights fees for it, we have an incredible cash cow. And so, there was this feeling that, Fox could be playing the long game here, that they see that potential. What's kind of been a hitch in their plan is we saw a real decline in year 2 in the places that matter, and in particular the television ratings. For Fox, this is a television program, and television programs get canceled all the time. And we saw that happen with the first XFL, and it can happen out of the blue. So they've got to do something different, and they've got to show some growth in year 3.
I guess I just wish that any of these, and I don't even know, the XFL and the wording behind their branding, I think was more than this. But to me, a lot of these boil down to 100 million people watch NFL football, or whatever the number is. If we can get 5% of that, 10% of that, like, this is great. And not really, I guess, understanding the other work that needs to go into that. And it, I've said on here, like, the USFL feels lazy to me. It feels like you like football, here is more football, and not necessarily understanding maybe why these fan bases have people that care about them, and that you can't just, okay, Tampa didn't work this year, we're going to shut that down and we're going to bring it back later. Or like with the XFL, well, Vegas didn't work, we're going to, like, you still had 6,000 people there every week. Like, I mean, at some point it needs to matter. It can't just be all about dollars and cents.
Right. And, you look back at the early years of the American Football League in the 1960s. And if you go back and look at the Oakland Raiders attendances, the first couple of years, there were 3,000 people in that place. And so, and behind the scenes, they had no money. They were being bankrolled by the other teams, and they weren't the only ones. What's missing, I think, is that unity of purpose that, for instance, the American Football League owners had. When one stumbles, there was another one there to pick them up. And so, we are missing that. And that's, I think, a huge missing piece in the spring football landscape.
I was just listening to First Take yesterday, and they had on Adam Silver, right, the NBA commissioner, and he's talking, I guess I'm not the biggest NBA fan, but they're starting a new in-season tournament to kind of try to build out interest before the All-Star break and all of that. And, he's talking, well, we got to do this. You can't just do the one year of this and then, hey, it's going to matter. You got to build this year and year and year and year and year to kind of give value there. And it doesn't feel like any of these alt leagues are at that point where, hey, like, you have to come, you got to come back.
And it's hard because, the NBA has the luxury of time. They could do this for 5 years and really not impact the bottom line at all. Yeah. All of these leagues, these alt spring football leagues, they could lose hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in that time. It's a different deal because they have so much riding on this, and because it's so expensive. They don't have the revenue source of the NBA. And we were just talking about if these leagues look at it as, if we can even draw this tiny minuscule percentage of the NFL audience, will be okay. To a degree, you really have to say the NFL is irrelevant to these guys. What you have to do is you have to be in there and you have to compete against the NBA. You have to compete against the NHL. You have to compete against March Madness. You get into early season baseball, depending on how late you go. So those are what you have to compete against, in addition to all the local stuff. So, it's difficult.
In terms of kind of transitioning here to the trademark stuff, and we'll get out of here. The obviously the NSFL stuff was trademarked, which is funny, right? Like, it was the holding company, and we kind of lived through all this. And then now, obviously, this week, the XFL registering the United Football League trademarks. First off, are you surprised that having us even gone through all of these USFL lawsuits and everything that, covering all of this the last couple of years for the new USFL to acquire all that, XFL obviously paying to bring that stuff out of bankruptcy. Like, are you surprised that they would so willingly just, okay, we're going to brand this into something new?
I am a little bit surprised because of the efforts that they have put into attaining, making peace with the original USFL guys. They've really gone to a lot of lengths to acquire and utilize this. They've leaned into the history now, especially in year 2. They were able to do that more. Part of me, I wonder if they've seen that the demographics have skewed a little bit older and that they kind of want to get away from that a little bit. So, yeah, it has been a little bit surprising to me.
Because, I mean, it really derailed all of season 1 and kind of, I think, the goal that they wanted to do dealing with these lawsuits coming in this year. It didn't do a lot for me, but again, I'm not the demo for that. But it does just, the time and energy and money, like you said, and the even whatever that settlement was, it just seems weird that they would, especially for the USFL. Like, I get Fox and okay, Danny and The Rock, like we bought this thing out. Okay, like I don't know, to me, it felt like Fox was so controlling kind of this IP and steamrolled so much of that they would give that up. Just is very shocking.
Oh, yes. And there's still things going on where they're trying to protect that IP.
Yeah.
So, and that's why it's a little bit surprising that they would change the name. Perhaps that was the most palatable solution for their new partners, potentially, or they just see a value in being able to build off a different brand, perhaps.
In terms of the UFL trademarks, what is the history of that? I know that the National Gridiron League, they were kind of a scammy league. They I think still have an outstanding trademark, but that to me isn't the bigger issue. To me, the NSFL was never going to work because the NFL exists, and that's not public that they've said anything, but I can imagine. And Josh Gerben, who had the report about the UFL, basically said as much. What are your thoughts of them? Is this just these are 3 initials that we could get control of, or like what do you make of this?
We just talked about the USFL and the history there and the length that Fox went through to gain control of that IP. This is a different deal. That this is just, I believe, it's just a name. There's no, there isn't any good feelings that exist about the old United Football League. It was such a flash in the pan league, and even alternative football fans had a hard time finding it. So it does seem like it's just a name. It's kind of close to the last name, which is advantageous. They could do something different with it. And it really does reflect kind of a union with the XFL. So it's a good name from that perspective. But as far as the history of it goes, there's really nothing that I believe that Fox would want to lean into there.
Do you think that there's enough scammy stuff in the past or enough failure there associated with the marks that if people are going through? So what is this? 09 to 12 was the last iteration this was played.
Right. And it was such a weird league, is that it was owned principally by a guy named Bill Hambrecht. And he had been a minority owner of the Oakland Invaders of the USFL years before. Made like $1 billion in Silicon Valley. But he never funded this league. So it was perpetually playing what looked like a test season for some reason. Never had more than 5 teams in a year, played parts of 4 different seasons, and just stumbled throughout. The last 2 seasons were abbreviated. They ended up canceling the final weeks, holding impromptu championships. They had to get on and they had to beg the players to finish out another week of the 2012 season. And then ended up stiffing them all. Dennis Green, the former NFL coach, had a lawsuit outstanding for, not receiving his pay. And it was guy after guy after guy. And there was substantial money that could have backed the league. But it was just never really funded. They seem to have been banking on an NFL work stoppage. And that they would get a TV contract out of that deal and somehow hold on to the TV contract after the NFL resumed playing, and they would split this huge TV contract amongst their 4 teams or something. I don't really understand what they were thinking. But if you're playing in the fall on Wednesday and Friday nights on obscure cable channels, you're probably resigning yourself to anonymity, and that's exactly what they did.
And just to clarify here, and you can clarify as well, I've seen a lot of people like, oh, does that mean like they've acquired all the marks or they've acquired all the teams? I mean, they've registered the UFL trademark, the United Football League trademark for a various number of, number of mediums, right? Like entertainment and clothing and streaming and kind of all those different things. But in terms of, there's no other teams or anything that they're acquiring through all of this.
No, and I wouldn't see the value in doing so. They had some kind of flash in the pan, short-term success stories in Omaha and Sacramento, maybe Hartford and Virginia Beach to some small degree. But really, at the end of the day, that IP is probably not worth anything.
It's funny you're talking here about obscure TV networks. Hey, it's CBS Sports Network, man. That's the CFL's.
And that was a huge step up for the UFL. They were on, they were on HDNet, and they were so easy. And you had to hunt on a Wednesday or a Friday night to find these guys. And especially the first year, they had this brilliant idea where every team, all four, would wear the league colors. So you had this black, blue, and green. Everybody was those colors. So you had to really look at the helmet to even figure out who was playing. And the crowd was no help because they were minuscule crowds everywhere. And they ended up switching venues to try to make it look better, and that didn't work at all. So it was a bizarre kind of circus atmosphere.
Last thing from me, and just, obviously there's no connection here now more than just kind of ironic, I guess, that Vince McMahon, right, when he was going to do the 2020 version, had mulled around, right, with this, last owned the trademarks for that. Am I understanding that right, back in 2018 before he settled on the XFL? That
was my understanding, too, that he had looked at the United Football League as a name for his league.
What's old is new again, and it's weird how time is a flat circle with all of this stuff, and whatever someone thinks that they've got the equation figured out, it seems to come back again.
And there was a prior United Football League in the early 60s, 61 to 64, which was really more of a minor kind of semi-pro outfit. So these names have a way of being recycled over and over.
Anything else here? How are you just optimistic moving forward? How are you feeling 1 to 10 here?
So optimistic might be a little bit of a stretch, but kind of, I'm probably just, with so many fans just waiting to see, kind of hoping that the league will actually strengthen itself, and hoping that a lot of the markets get preserved, that where there has been some home games played, that, we're able to preserve as many of those markets as possible. That would be the ideal thing.
Interesting times here. Always something new. Just when I was kind of getting bored a little bit of all this, and like, man, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in, and we got new drama here. So, Paul, I appreciate it. Like I said, with OurSports Central, everything else, USFL historian and all football historian here at this point. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me on, Reed. Good to see you again.
Well, we have Jamie and I back on here from the Green Zone. We're talking CFL football here. I will say, Kraken off to not a good start this season. And our boy, Regina's own Jordan Eberle really let me down here, or at least Saskatchewan's own. So I'm very upset over the weekend. He missed his shootout shot.
Yeah, he's a Regina guy. Ebs, former Regina Pat. Is he fighting now? What is happening with Jordan Eberle? He's getting in the fisticuffs going on.
And we were about 2 minutes into the game. Yeah, he was, because we don't like McCarr because he checked McCann back in the playoffs. But yeah, Eberle was going. They said he had some past history. I think they played together, him and the guy he was fighting. But at least Connor Bedard's not a bust. He's putting in goals for the Chicago Blackhawks, so that's good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he is. And it's not like you have a lack of discussion about Connor Bedard in the National Hockey League either. It's also you can't avoid it. He's the guy right now in the NHL. Check him out when the Blackhawks are in Seattle. Check him out.
Obviously, I did see his teammate was like, I think we're kind of overdoing this a little bit. I feel like that today, perusing Twitter with Nathan Rourke being elevated, to the active roster of like, oh my God. It's like,
it's happening. It's happening.
Yeah,
Here we go.
Thoughts here. So we're here. I'm really curious because obviously you're really checked in, tuned into the Saskatchewan market and everything. Like, what is Rider Nation? What are their thoughts this year? Because it's been a weird season for the Riders.
They're done. They're done with this team. They're done with the coaching staff. They're done with the general manager. They're done. They're done. Some people don't even want them to make the playoffs. That's how done they are. Then this is the second straight year. It's absolutely Groundhog's Day for the Roughriders to go 6-5 and then lose 7 straight last year, and now could lose 7 straight this year if they lose to the Toronto Argonauts on Saturday. So it is a lot of frustration over where the direction of this team has gone.
So I'm looking here. I have the playoff scenario. Calgary wins and Saskatchewan loses. Calgary's in. Saskatchewan wins. Calgary loses. Calgary's playing BC. And, BC has been known to kind of drop, I've had my fair share of frustrating moments here. But that's a weird spot where they don't even want to make the playoffs. Because I do think you need some sense of accountability here after everything that's gone down.
No, yeah, that's exactly what. And that's what people are waiting for is pretty much the changes to happen. Like, what's going to happen? When's it going to happen? To just move on with what we're calling the stink, the rot of this, just to go, okay, let's move on. Now, of course, there's always the chance that you never know if someone catches lightning in a bottle and they have an unbelievable, unpredictable playoff run, but there's no way this team's going into BC and going into Winnipeg and winning football games. I just don't see much of it. Just maybe one, but not twice. So, yeah.
In terms of kind of where all this, because obviously the Trevor Harris and everything, is it all go back to that, or are there further deeper issues here going into the season?
It's clearly deeper than just losing your quarterback, because last year they had a quarterback. They lost 7 straight, and it was... You go, are they quitting on the coach? Are they? I don't know. Maybe let's see what happens when they get rid of AC Leonard and some of the bad boys. I'm trying to remember the term. Craig Dickinson actually had a term, renegades or something like that on the team last year. So that AC Leonard's gone and Mike Edams no longer here. And of course the Garrett Marino thing, he's out too. Duke Williams, bye. Shaq Evans, he's out. Cody Fajardo, Jason Moss. So they do this changeover and you're thinking, okay, that's where they put the blame. The coaching staff, everybody went, that's the problem. It'll be better. They're worse. They are a worse football team than they were last year. And some of that is the quarterback, but I think it's preparation, it's emotion, it's a lot of different things that has soured the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Side note, what do you make of Cody's season in Montreal? I know he was hurt, and they're still, and they seemed like they were hot. Now they're kind of, at least clean to second there. But were you pleasantly surprised, or what did you make?
I think Cody Fajardo, I think Jason Moss has done a pretty darn good job to have that team play to the strengths of an offense led by Cody Fajardo. They are the second lowest team in offensive touchdowns. It's not like Cody Fajardo has led this team to second place. Cody Fajardo has been part of a team that has led them to second place. But I think it's more Jason Moss and Noel Thorpe have done a pretty darn good job on finding what they're good at, finding how to win football games, and that's what has had Montreal. But I think Cody Fajardo definitely, and Jason Moss can definitely, flex a little bit, saying, yeah, we were the scapegoats in Saskatchewan. There were deeper problems, and you got what you got for Saskatchewan.
Not to have it be a deep dive Montreal podcast here, but this really could have been a wasted season for them, which is everything, and the ownership coming in and all the changes. It's really remarkable here that, they were second last year in the East, second this year, and they're one game away from potentially getting to the finals there. It could have been a lot worse for them as well if you look at Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I was looking at Montreal as potentially being third or fourth in the East Division. Yeah. When you looked at it on paper, they lost a lot of talent out of that team. A lot of guys left, so that's what I was maybe looking at. But Noel Thorpe's defense has been outstanding. Cody has managed the games very well, and now that they're starting to find a little bit of identity on the ground game with Fletcher and when Stanback's healthy, That could be a dangerous team if they can run the ball with that core three, with Cody also using his legs come playoff time, although beating Toronto is not going to be easy.
In terms of Saskatchewan here, like you said, people want the wholesale changes. Farhan was on last week, and like there's not all the contracts end the same, right? They're overlapping where they're like, it makes it challenging to kind of bring in fresh blood maybe next year. Like, what do you, I mean, I know people are asking for people's heads and everything else, but like, what is realistically possible there?
I think it is Jeremy O'Day is interesting. I'm not sure. The whole coaching staff could be gassed. Like, it's just go get done. Just away. You're fired. Bye. A lot of them, I think all of them are on the last year of their deal, so you can get rid of those contracts. Craig Dickinson's the biggest one. He's up at the end of the year. Jeremy O'Day is up at the end of the year if you want to go to the general manager spot. A lot of the attention is actually on the president, Craig Reynolds, on how far up it goes, and does he take anything? Do they change the president? Because when Jim Hobson was here, that was, a decade of brilliance. They made it to a bunch of Grey Cups, 4 Grey Cups, won 2, lost 2 in pretty well 10 years of Jim Hobson. And then since that time, they haven't made a Grey Cup. They have hosted some playoff games, but it has been all over the place on good, bad. And there's some fans who feel they're saying they feel taken for granted. That's never a good thing. And they're talking about turning in their season tickets, not renewing. And that's what does the talking when it gets to the president and CEO, is who's spending the money and who's not.
Because I guess that was my follow-up question was, are we at the point, and I want to kind of compare this to Edmonton, but are we at the point where if they don't do anything, it's like demonstrable damage here at the end, going into the next season?
They're doing something. They can't do stuff's happening. It's just a matter of when. Okay. It could be we could be talking on Sunday. Like, if everything goes sideways, if Calgary beats BC, which I don't see happening, but if they do it and Saskatchewan loses and it's over, we're talking Sunday, Monday, and changes are being made. And contracts are not it's going to be announced as, well, we will not renew the contract. We are beginning the process of finding the new head coach, potentially a new general manager, and even lesser so likelihood of a new president and CEO. Like, this is going to be a deep, deep change for the Roughriders after this season.
Is there, and obviously, swath of people across the board, whatever. I mean, is there like realistic? Because all I hear is, hey, trying to get people, coaching the CFL, and we got the Caps, and everything. Like, is it? Do you think there's enough qualified people out there to bring in to kind of rebuild the Riders?
I think so, and I think, like, with Kyle Walter's contract not being renewed yet in Winnipeg, he'd be the first guy I'd call as if you're changing the general manager. And then there's Buck Pierce, et cetera, et cetera. You go down on trying to tie the connections on who can do. Jordan McSimic would be somebody I'd reach out to, the BC Lions offensive coordinator. We're seeing young, good coordinators. And I think Ryan Dinwiddie set a good example. And it doesn't even have to be a coordinator. If you think it's a good, young, smart coach, and we're seeing it in the National Football League too, with like Mike McDaniels and some of these guys, Zach Taylor, who are younger, who get a year, maybe not even any, as a coordinator experience, but going, wow, they are smart. And that's where I go. I would go with an offensive coach to start things off and let a defensive coordinator cook a little bit without being the head coach. Because this offense the last 3 years has been woeful. And that's what really that's what will get people in the stands. Scoring 30 points, that sells tickets.
Have you noticed, I mean, like, attendance wise this year, is it, because obviously we were there for Grey Cup and it was a weird situation because Winnipeg's there and we don't want to deal with that, but I mean, you're talking people turning in their season tickets, but is that actually happening?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We're having a hard time giving away our season tickets this weekend. We just can't, like, I'll be there for my job, but my family can't be there for, sports commitments for our kids. And usually it's easy. Other people are texting the show. Like, is anybody else having a hard time even giving away tickets? And they announced, I forget what it was, 27,000 or something for the last home game against Hamilton. There was 18,000 people there. Like, that was not there's people that are definitely not using their tickets. Not when they're out of towners. They're traveling 2, 3, 4 hours away to games. And I know it's kind of mind-boggling. I know different markets are like, what? How season ticket holders travel that far consistently? It's like, yeah, in Saskatchewan, a 2-hour drive is nothing. I'll do a 2-hour drive there and back in a day and not even blink an eye. So that's the lifestyle here. So people are saying they don't want to spend the gas money to watch. So I'll be very interested to see. And it's unfortunate because it's fan appreciation night, but I'll be interested to see how many green seats are sitting there empty on Saturday.
Yeah, that was like the Mariners, their last week of the season had fan appreciation week. Like, it was very apparent at that point we had played ourselves out of the playoffs. I'm like, no, I listened to that. We were driving back from BC for that fun experience, BC, Winnipeg and BC there on whatever October Friday was. Listening to Michael Ball and Luke call that game was an interesting perspective, having Hamilton come in and just completely pants the Riders. Like, it can't happen like that.
No, it is. That was bad. That was just when you had all the emotion of that week with George Reed, the 2013 team. They inducted the first woman in the Riders Plaza of Honor, Wendy Kelly. Like, they were honoring the past. They were honoring their legends. They were paying tribute. George Reed's family is there, and you lay an absolute egg, like absolute. Craig Dickinson called it embarrassing, and it was completely embarrassing for the organization. And head coach Craig Dickinson was bang on with his assessment after the game.
In terms of it's weird that talk right now. We're talking like, season ticket holders and everything and health of a franchise where like Edmonton here, up into a couple months ago was like on this tailspin and Victor Cui and everything else and Trey Ford. I'm like, now, I mean, Chris Jones could be like coach of the year here with kind of this turnaround and everything. Like, does that surprise you? Cause like, I think in a different, and obviously we're talking about it, but in a world where Edmonton maybe didn't have this dumpster fire for half the year, there's more of a spotlight on Saskatchewan and Calgary in terms of like kind of fundamental issues going on.
Am I surprised that Chris Jones has turned it around?
Well, just surprised that at this point, like they're looking like it's roses over there compared to what's going on in Saskatchewan and Calgary.
For me, I'm surprised it took this long. We saw Chris Jones do this in Saskatchewan, and he took over in 2016. He gutted the team. He brought in guys. They had a slow start in year 2, but, they were cooking. They got to, I think, 10 wins that year. And that's where it was like, oh, what is going on? 0-9. They made a huge error with Trey Ford. Like, it was a huge error on evaluating what he brought to the team. And if they would have started Trey Ford week 4, week 5, they're in the playoffs. They're a playoff team. I truly believe that. And we're not even having a conversation about the Riders and the Calgary Stampeders trying to get to the playoffs. I think Edmonton would be a playoff team if they make that move earlier. So there was some sort of personality conflict between the coach and the quarterback, which is unfortunate. But you have to put ego aside sometime and make sure you got the best guys out there. And Trey Ford is definitely that for Edmonton.
Thoughts on Calgary and just kind of the state of everything there? I mean, obviously not your direct market, but here in the West, like, because it seems like there's precariousness coming up there.
These are two bad teams, Calgary and Saskatchewan. It's like that game last week was painful to watch. The two teams battling for a playoff spot. And both of them looked like they were at points disinterested in winning the football game and making bad decisions. So I've been calling it a snail's race for third between these two sides. So I still think the Riders make the playoffs. I do. I think the most likely scenario is Calgary loses both their games, Saskatchewan loses their game, and Saskatchewan still gets in the playoffs. Like, crazy. Like, since Labor Day weekend, when Calgary and Saskatchewan both won at home, Calgary beat Edmonton, Saskatchewan beats Winnipeg, their combined records are 1-9 for Calgary and Saskatchewan. Like, that is unbelievable how poor these two teams have played down the stretch.
I was listening that I was filming because that was like Labor Day and I was booked to go film some festival. And so I'm literally outside. Because it's so hard to watch games in America now. Like the CFC, the CBS Sports Network.
I thought the CFL Plus thing was great. People have told me the CFL Plus thing's great. No?
Yeah, if I'm available for 3 hours uninterrupted in the exact time the game on, it's great. But if you have anything else in your life going on at that specific time, you can never, God forbid I watch a game an hour late or on demand or whatever. But I'm sitting there, I'm listening to the CFL Plus. I got my headphone in, I'm filming, and I'm listening to, Saskatchewan, that crazy game, right? The Labor, what was it? They call it the Labor Day Classic game.
Yeah.
And just to see and because we're doing our little Monday recap shows now, we're like, man, Saskatchewan's really got some life, and Dollagala, and this feels like, and it just completely lost from there. Do you like Dollagala going forward? I mean, do you think he's a solution going into next year?
I think the quarterback spot is interesting. Clearly it's no longer Mason Fine, or Mason Fine would be back in, because Jake Dollagala has not been that great over the last couple of weeks. So clearly it's Jake Dollagala. What do you do next year with Trevor Harris? If he can play, if he's healthy, I would think whoever's coming in would want a veteran coach. And then do you have Jake Dollagala as number 2 and just change out the quarterbacks behind him? I don't think a rebuild, you go in with Jake Dollagala, or you're running into a potential of a Taylor Cornelius situation where you're 0-9 to start a season. You're in desperation mode, which is no way to start anew. But I still think I would like to see Jake Dollagala with different coaching. I want to see him with a QB coach and an offensive coordinator who have been there, done that. Kelly Jeffrey fell into the job because all these other more qualified coaches turned them down. And that's where it's almost, okay, Kelly, it's yours. And it hasn't been a wow at all. So, and I watched practice drills of the quarterbacks, and I was like, they don't work on footwork really and stuff like that. Or I'm like, I remember watching Jason Moss. I remember watching Kahari Jones, watching those guys work quarterbacks and the drills they do, and it looks more polished. And that's what I haven't seen in Saskatchewan this year. So I would really like to see who gets brought in and what kind of QB tutelage Jake Dollagala can get. Because I'm not sure he's gotten this full support over the last 2 years.
It's interesting. I mean, I think, if he, it's one of those things like if he was your choice, you would have just started him. You wouldn't have gone and done the Trevor Harris and kind of all that stuff. Because it was right going into this season, people didn't want to go Saskatchewan, right? Because you were still having Dickinson and everything. But now you think it'd be, if you could come in, make everything our own, right? That Saskatchewan would be a very appealing place for a new head coach.
I would think so. I would think if it's like, oh, you got a veteran quarterback under contract, that's a good start, because you go into a position, you're like, who's a quarterback? Like right now it's Trevor Harris if he's healthy, and you have some potential behind him. And I think there's a great core of Canadians. I think Jeremy O'Day's done a good job of drafting and bringing in Canadians. Like there's a good enough group here that you can definitely look at and go, oh yeah, I could make this work, and probably do a quicker turnaround than a complete overhaul and have it be a 2 or 3 year plan, so to speak.
In terms of just kind of rounding out the conversation here before we go about the West, just curious your thoughts on the kind of the BC Winnipeg of it all. I wanted to be at that game. I kind of thought that was BC season, and not having the opportunity to be first and having to go into Winnipeg, to me, that was, and it was funny because I think they had done a really good job hyping that game up for local people. Because I'm sitting there and people are like, "Oh, are they out now? What does this mean?" I'm like, well, no, but it kind of feels that way. what do you make of that, and just kind of what is likely BC in some regard going into Winnipeg and playing in the West?
I like the BC Lions. I like this matchup. Clearly they match up well against each other. There's one blowout and then another blowout and then a really good close game that Winnipeg came back to win, which shows, the BC Lions can win a football game, and they have won in Winnipeg. So they have that belief in them. It's just whether or not Vernon Adams can keep the ball safe. And that BC Lions defense needs to get better. They've been allowing a lot of points recently. Like at the start of the season, you'll remember, it was like they were allowing less than one touchdown a game. They were dominant. Now I think they're averaging almost 30 points per game allowed. So that's the big issue. If BC cleans up their defense and Ryan Phillips gets that crew anywhere close to what they were at the start of the season, I think the BC Lions could be in the Grey Cup.
Yeah, I mean, they were the donut boys, and then they were giving up 50 burgers, and I think someone made a joke on the thing about it. Last thing for me, like, and you've done this, clearly a lot longer than I've been involved in this space. Like, we talk Saskatchewan, Calgary, right? Ottawa's got its own bag of issues over there. How are you feeling, like, just state of the CFL here? I mean, for the most part, five, six teams feeling decent. Like, how do you just kind of rate the space here of everything going on?
Well, I like that we've seen increased attendance in Toronto, a bit of an uptick in other markets as well. Of course, Ottawa is going to be down. It's been back-to-back bad years. Like they're in the Grey Cup in 2018. It's just gone south since that time. But I think that's a fan base you can win back with wins. Clearly, they'll show up. So they'll have some work to do this offseason. Saskatchewan fans, if they get to 9-9 next year, they'll have a good group of fans coming back to the stadium. So overall, I think the CFL has improved. The ratings are up or have been up from last year. I think there's growing interest, which I think all culminates from just being around again. That lost season was, I think it was a bad call. I think you needed to play, even if it was an 8-week season, something to exist. A lot of people were turned off by that. So I think it's back to normal, back to 18 weeks, all that stuff for these teams. I'm interested to see how the Saturday playoff games go rather than playing on Sunday. Ratings wise, it's a bit of a change, other than the Grey Cup will still be played on Sunday, of course. But all in all, I think there's a lot of positive signs. Unfortunately, Edmonton, Ottawa have not been good attendance-wise. But again, if Trey Ford lights some fire in Edmonton, those fans will come back.
I think we did the math that Toronto has more wins this season than Ottawa's had since their Grey Cup season, I think is what it was with 14 or whatever, if you combine the seasons. The Saturday thing, I got the schedule for the media stuff for the CFL, and they're like, everything's shifted up. I'm like, well, this is lovely for people coming in and trying to, come in from out of town. Everything's shifted up. So we'll see. I had complaints about that. And then I found out today, the dang bar I was going to use to do our show, TSM rented it out the whole weekend. So now I got to pivot on that. So TSN's getting into the biz here. So still stuff to figure out that way. But anything else from you? I appreciate your time.
No, it's always fun. I can't wait to see how this all plays out in Saskatchewan off season. And do you have any picks? Are we hanging out in Hamilton again?
We're there. So I didn't know if you were
coming.
Absolutely. We'll be there. Tim Baines just told me he's in. Green Day put him over the top, and then we've got our whole little Monday recap show we've been doing coming up there. So it'll be fun. You're certainly invited. I think I have a plan of where we're going to go live, so it'll be convenient. And of course you're welcome to be.
I can't wait to hang out again. Always nice to see you guys at Grey Cup. And what do you think? Here's my way out. I have the obvious prediction: Toronto, Winnipeg, and a rematch. That's boring. My more way out there prediction is last week's game was a Grey Cup preview. BC Lions and the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
No, I like that. I was just going to say, because so Jason Hussey, our co-host on the Recount You, he's a Ticats fan, and I'm obviously America's CFL team here. And so I think that would be truly would unite all the, unite both countries and all that. But I would love to see, like Montreal was so close to getting there, right? And it was like the missed field goal, right? I'm like fever dream now. I've had an XFL and the USFL season in between, like whatever happened with that. But we'd love to see, Cody in there. But I think Toronto, if it's Toronto, Winnipeg again, it's just hard. But at least Toronto, it feels a little fresh because just from last year. So
if Cody Fajardo makes it to the Grey Cup, Saskatchewan, I don't know what we'll do with ourselves, because it was get him out of here last year. Like, he is terrible. Get him out. And if he makes a Grey Cup, he has a lot of bragging rights over the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and good on him if he does.
I would say whatever the missed field goal, whatever away from Gary Sturm would have been live on our show for you. I had in his word would have been their Grey Cup. I think I could get Cody on Saturday before. I think we could get Cody on if he if this works out. But otherwise, fever dream. Chad Kelly's already unfollowed me on Twitter, so I think that ship has sailed. But Jamie, I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll see you soon. Making time here at night and everything else. That means a lot.
Yeah, no problem, Reed. Always appreciate it. Can't wait to see you in Hamilton.
Well, I appreciate it. Making time today. I'm outside. My neighbor, I'm exporting wedding video edits right now. My neighbor's cutting tiles, so hopefully this works out. We have Gord back here, Krown, Gridiron Nation, everything else. How are you, sir?
I'm good. It looks like the weather in your neck of the woods is a heck of a lot better than the weather in mine, so...
Well, we're similar time zone, similar all that going on. We got West Coast represent this week.
Yes, absolutely. I'm in the soggy version of the West Coast, so Northwest Coast.
Well, I appreciate BC Lions here today. I want to get your thoughts on that. We're talking CFL Week 20, everything else. Bird's eye view, what do you make of the season thus far? I know we saw you at one of the games, was it last year or earlier? It all kind of blurs together here, but what have you made of CFL 2023?
I mean, I think it's been a good year. I'm pretty biased out here on the West Coast. Like the storyline going into the season was, how are the Lions gonna respond to the loss of Nathan Rourke, and was Vernon Adams going to be able to steer the ship? And I think that's been answered with a resounding yes. Adams is squarely in the middle of the MOP conversation. I think he's probably a little bit of an underdog behind Caleros, but he's in that conversation, which tells you how the year's gone. So, from a biased perspective out here on the West Coast, it's been a phenomenal season. What I think has been interesting, Winnipeg and Toronto have been kind of the top of the heap in both conferences for the last couple of years, but some of the other traditional powerhouses like Calgary, for example, is scratching and clawing just to make the playoffs right now. Saskatchewan's right on that bar as well. The phenomenal turnaround of the Edmonton Elks once they finally started playing Trey Ford. There's been some really great storylines carrying on throughout the year that I think have certainly drawn my interest even more so than they would in a normal year, because I think there's been a lot of intrigue and a lot of excitement.
What I don't get, and I agree with you, Vernon's been phenomenal. That was kind of my biggest question mark going into this year. So if he's been good, except for that Toronto game, right? Everyone kind of lays it. Even Jalen Hurts laid the egg here last weekend. For the Eagles, but. What is the Lions' issue then? I mean, I was there for the Winnipeg game. They've dropped some of these very winnable games against Hamilton. What is their issue right now if it's not Vernon?
I think there's a couple of things with regards to the Winnipeg games. I don't want to give them a pass, but that Winnipeg game ends with them losing out on a couple of pretty key crucial breaks. Vernon Adams probably has that critical first down with about 2 minutes left in that game that would have allowed them to basically ice it, and that. They don't get that call, and we don't really need to spend a lot of time getting into the merits of that, but that ends up really being a backbreaker for them. And then the previous two games against Winnipeg as well, and don't forget too that the Lions had Dominique, I think it was Rhymes, had Dominique Rhymes had the audacity and the wherewithal to hit the ground right at the end of regulation, then the Lions almost certainly win that, given the season that Sean White has had. Now, I don't blame him for that, but again, circumstantially, they caught a couple of pretty bad breaks in that fourth quarter along the way to blowing that big lead against Winnipeg. And then the previous two games in Winnipeg, don't forget, were not just in Winnipeg, but the Lions in both of them were on the back end of a short week, coming off of a Sunday game and a Saturday game, with the second one, Winnipeg, coming off of a bye. The odds were very much stacked against them in that. So they've run into some misfortune with Winnipeg in particular this year. In terms of their shortcomings, their issues, their ability to run the football effectively has been an issue all season long. They've been a very one-dimensional offense. They lose their left guard early in the season to what's probably a career-threatening injury, unfortunately, or health condition, I guess I should say. So they've been working with backups on the offensive line pretty much the entire season. So they do have that as maybe be a bit of an excuse working for them. But what has been interesting watching the team is I feel like I have seen some explosion out of the running game, but they just haven't been able to do so consistently. Like I like Smoke Mizell. I liked Sean Shivers when he was in earlier in the season. They've been rotating a couple other names in there as well. And you've seen flashes, but they just have not been able to do it consistently. And when it has been needed the most, like in the second half of that Winnipeg game where they needed to try and run the clock, salt the game away, they just weren't effectively able to do that.
I just don't get if you're the BC Lions and all roads go through Winnipeg here regardless, and home field advantage otherwise, like you're going to play Winnipeg. That wouldn't be we obviously don't hang on to Butler and Mizell, like I said, like you said, has been good, but if that's your hurdle, I guess I'm just surprised that there wasn't more emphasis because Vernon's slinging it like the air game is not the problem right now.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that salary constraints dictated a few of those decisions, right? I think Butler is a pretty obvious salary constraint decision. That you brought in Adams last year, partway through the year, and you kind of had him on the cheap. And then all of a sudden, you now had to pay him like your starting quarterback going into this season. That inflates that value significantly. And they've got a couple other big ticket guys as well. If you're going to have, like, let's face it, they've got probably the most talented receiving core in the entire league. But if you're going to have that intact with established guys across the board, those guys all come at a pretty good ticket. So I think salary constraints have been a part of it. And in terms of bigger issues with the team as well, like I have been pretty openly critical of Rick Campbell's game management. His personnel management is outstanding. He's one of the best players coaches in the entire league, I would say. But I have been very critical of his game management, his use of challenges, his management of clocks and timeouts, and some of his decisions to kick field goals. I do think that at the margins, that has hurt this team at times as well. And so I'm hopeful it doesn't come back to bite them when things matter the most.
I don't want to look too far ahead here because obviously we're still optimistic for this season. BC hosting next year, right? Grey Cup. I feel like we're in a window right now. Are we in the middle of a window? Is the window closed? Like, where do you view BC right now?
Well, I think they're squarely in the middle of the window, and that's in large part because of Vernon Adams. Now, Adams has his shortcomings, but he's a guy who's in the prime of his career. And now you're insulated from if Nathan Mork sticks in the NFL and never comes back. And that is a real change in fortunes from at the outset of the season where it was, man, hopefully Adams can be a decent stopgap, but we don't know how we're going to react to losing, the best quarterback that's been in this league in a decade. It's tough to bounce back from that. And so, you put that into perspective. I think the Lions have done a phenomenal job of not just bouncing back from that, but thriving despite that. This team, it isn't the same as Nathan Rourke's team last year, but it doesn't look that different from Nathan Rourke's team last year. And that's full credit to the players on the field and the staff involved. I do still like the Lions' chances, especially given those circumstantial things I talked about when playing Winnipeg. But the reality of the matter is that barring something completely miraculous working in the Lions' favor the last couple of weeks here, you've put yourself in a position where you're going to have to win that game in Winnipeg to get through to the Grey Cup. To say that's never easy is an understatement. That's a really, really tall task to ask. And it's Winnipeg. They've cut their teeth. They're not just a good, talented team. They know how to win in this league. And so, the odds are against them to get through to the Grey Cup. But that being said, you have as explosive an offense as they have, and you can win any game. And Ryan Phillips has shown the ability to at least keep the lid on even the best offenses in this league, if not shut them down entirely. And so it very well could all come together for them.
It's remarkable. Yeah, Vernon, I don't want to kind of poo-poo what he's done in the last couple of years, but it certainly feels like a comeback kind of, if you could give a comeback player award right now, I do. Vernon has any fear that I had going into the season, and believe me, like I love Vernon as a person, been from local here Northwest guy, but talk about just a way to kind of change the narrative on that. You were talking about him being the underdog in the MOP race. if the Toronto game doesn't happen, is he more up there? I mean, what do you think it is? Is it just because Collaros and the Bombers are that much more dominant?
I mean, I think the head-to-heads work against him fairly or otherwise, right? And he, in going up against Zach Collaros, he's 0-3. And I to be honest, I think for a lot of people that conversation begins and ends there. The adding in the numbers of that Toronto implosion probably don't help as well, especially given that you can now make the argument that, in the games against the two best teams in the league, or at least the two other best teams in the league, he's really struggled. And he's really made hay against the lesser lights of this league. And so you could make that case if you were making that case against him. And I suspect that's probably what's going to sway a lot of voters at this point.
In terms of we talked the window for BC here in terms of being a championship team. Winnipeg, are you viewing them near the end of that? Or, we've had people on the show for weeks and, okay, the defense is getting old. They're not as dominant this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the one guy that really gives you hope for the future and some pause in that take is Brady Oliveira. Oliveira still in his mid-20s. He's got a lot of good years ahead of him. It's not fair to anybody to set the bar at Andrew Harris, but if he has anything resembling an Andrew Harris career, you got a lot of years of elite production potentially left in him. And certainly if you set that old 30-year-old mark that running backs often get, well, you still got a handful of years before you hit that. So that gives you some hope for the future. Quarterback longevity is as good as ever. I think Collaros has a lot of years left in him. I do think they'll have to reload on the defense eventually, but I look at some of the key guys on that defense. Adam Bighill, for example, one of the things that's been a thing with Bighill since he's been in the league is that he is as notorious of a diligent guy that takes care of his body in every sense of the word as anybody in the league. And so if anybody's going to be set up to have longevity at a position like linebacker, it's a guy like Adam Bighill who lives to take care of his body, and to take best care of himself. So I'm not by any means rushing to bury the Winnipeg Blue Bombers yet. You're right. They are a little bit older, and I think the changing of the guard is going to be inevitable eventually. And frankly, the run of success they've had in the Western Conference has been pretty unprecedented for them in the last handful of years. So it hasn't translated into a rash of Grey Cup victories like they may have expected, but within the Western Conference, they've been as dominant as anybody we've seen in a long time in this league. So I think that era, the Lions are very close to challenging them now. I think that era is slowly coming to an end, but they are far from dead yet.
It's just frustrating not to do too much here, BC, Winnipeg, but you look and I think we stack up pretty well across the board, except like you said, kind of that key running back and Mizell not really, being fine, and that's maybe not even like relying too much on that when we need to. It's frustrating because you feel like you could doing that kind of apples to apples comparison right now.
For sure. And watching the games between the two of them, I find really fun because there's two real different personalities on offense. Right. On offense, Winnipeg just wants to bludgeon you. They just want to keep chipping away at you constantly, keep throwing punches and just bit by bit wear you down, which is what you kind of saw in that last game between the two of them. BC on the flip side is much more of an explosive offense that's looking for those explosion plays that are going to just rock you to your core. And they are very capable of doing that. And so I find that to be a really fun clash of styles watching the two teams compete. Ultimately, I think the difference between the two of them comes down to whether the pass rushes are effective on either side. The Lions, Matthew Betts has had obviously an incredible season, but the Lions pass rush has been a little hit and miss. And even catching the break with Patty Neufeld being out for the last game against Winnipeg, the Lions, when it mattered most, they created a turnover in the second half, a huge one. But when it came down to it in the fourth quarter, they weren't able to get Collaros off his spot and off of his reads when they needed to most. And so that, I think, is going to be one of the keys for the Lions coming down the stretch and against these elite opponents. Is I'm not worried about their secondary. I'm worried about whether their front seven can consistently harass the opposition and get them out of their game plan.
Is there a world where Calgary beats BC here on Friday? I think I got the email. They're doing the blackout game. I mean, we'll talk about this game a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a world where Calgary beats BC, but I don't expect them to. But there's definitely a world where Calgary beats BC. Like, let's not forget, Calgary is fighting for their lives here. And while BC theoretically still has a chance at first place, I have a really hard time seeing Winnipeg with a chance to lock down first place lose to an eliminated Edmonton Elks team. Now, stranger things have definitely happened, but that doesn't feel like a likely scenario. So I don't know if the Lions are going to go into this with that real 110% type edge, whereas Calgary is. And that's kind of an intangible quality that can level the playing field, despite the fact that I am not super impressed with Calgary's roster as currently stands. Yeah, I think the Lions are the more talented team. It's the last game of the regular season for them. They want to finish out strong, all that kind of good stuff. But the other thing that looms here too is it's the potential for a rematch in the Western Semi as well. Right. And so there's also that added element of the Lions maybe potentially being a little bit cagey and playing some things a little closer to the vest, knowing that, the downside is pretty minimal for them in losing this game. And they may potentially have to have this team again when it matters most. So that element is also at play, which I know a lot of people aren't thinking that way, but with the Lions having a bye next week, like that's how they're thinking. So I think that's an interesting dynamic to it too.
Bigger disappointment this year, Calgary or Saskatchewan?
I would say Saskatchewan. I personally did not necessarily have that high of an expectation for Calgary. I know that they'd made the decision that Jake Mayer was their guy and they were moving on from Bo Levi. But Mayer showed competence last year. But he didn't really show more than that. And if you looked at the surrounding cast of characters, I didn't necessarily, as I kind of alluded to before, I didn't necessarily see what I thought was an exceptionally talented roster around him. I don't think it's one of the stronger rosters in the league, if we're being honest. Saskatchewan, on the other hand, you can give them the quarterback injury thing, and that I think is a fair excuse to give them. But it's Saskatchewan. Expectations are always high in Saskatchewan. They've gone through a pretty significant, for them at least, drought at this point in time in terms of having sustained success. This is not the Saskatchewan Roughriders of our father's era that went decades without winning Grey Cups, and that was just the reality of it. The modern Roughriders have an expectation to be competing for Grey Cups every single year, and so for them realistically not to come anywhere near that. This is a below 500 team. That's not a Grey Cup contender. And if they back into the playoffs, great for them. But that the Sea of Green is not pleased with not having even a single playoff game to go cheer for. So I would say that they're the bigger disappointment all in all.
In terms of Edmonton here, taking on, what do we have, right? Winnipeg. A lot of momentum here kind of coming out, and we've joked on here, you start Trey Ford here, maybe week 4, and we're in a completely different, but are you excited for the Elks moving forward? Optimistic? What adjective would you use?
Well, the big elephant in the room for me is Chris Jones. He's making a ton of money. I don't think you can get rid of him logistically. But I don't know that he's shown the ability. He's a great in-game schemer. I don't know that he's shown the ability to, he's kind of the opposite of Rick Campbell in a lot of ways, right? This guy can draw the heck out of a defense. He's a good schemer that way, a great game planner, but the way that he manages personnel is not effective. It's just not. He has thrown in the past, he's thrown big money at guys that are over the hill, that have made minimal impact. He has stuck with guys that anybody with working pair of eyes can see are not getting the job done for far too long. I think there's a legitimate argument that his decision at quarterback is the singular reason that they're not in the playoff team this year. So I think that's the looming question for them. Trey Ford, I'm fully aboard the Trey Ford bandwagon. You see a creator like that, so long as he stays healthy, I think that that's a really exciting player in this league, and a guy that can get things done. Like he kind of gives me Damon Allen vibes in the way that he plays. I wouldn't say he has the arm strength that Damon Allen did at his peak, but that's the kind of vibe that I get from him. And I mean, as Edmonton fans know well as anybody, Damon Allen was an incredibly successful player in this league. So having that piece in place gives you reason for optimism, for sure. But I question whether Chris Jones is going to be able to put it all together, because so far as a head coach, he hasn't. As a coordinator, he has. As a head coach, he has not. And so that's where I wonder about things, because his tenure as a head coach, whether in Saskatchewan or here in Edmonton, has been marred by questionable personnel decisions, has been marred by at times controversy. It hasn't been great. And I just don't know if he's the guy to get that job done.
It's curious, like, do you give him credit for finally coming around on Trey Ford, or do we hold that against him that it took him half the season? Like, like where does that line moving forward?
A little both, right? Like I do give him credit, and you know, we need to, I think, understand his context, which is that, you know, he's a guy from Tennessee, and you know, his background, his context is he is an American guy through and through, and there are some biases to move past when that's your background, right? You see a guy like Cornelius. Well, Cornelius went to Oklahoma State, and if you're Chris Jones, you're looking at that being like, okay, well, I know Oklahoma State, good school, right? They play some really good ball. This kid must play some really good ball. It defies logic to look at two players and then look at the other player and go, okay, well, I got a small kid that went to Waterloo, which I couldn't even point out on a map of Waterloos, and start him over Taylor Cornelius, who went to Oklahoma State, right? Like that. So I do give him a little bit of credit for eventually coming around on that. But that being said, what were you looking at during training camp and in practice and during the first, 7 games? I think that Cornelius started, something like that.
Yeah,
like, how did it take you 7 games to look at this and go, this isn't working? And at some point in time too, when you're 0-8 out of the gate, like that's what it took you to finally make a change. Holy smokes, man. Like, you waited until you were already out of the playoffs to make the change. And it felt like for a good month that the only thing keeping Cornelius in the job was your stubbornness and insisting that you got it right initially. And so there's two sides to the coin with that, because I don't want to not give him any credit, but at the same time, I don't want to go and praise him and say, oh, well, he gave a Canadian quarterback a chance. That's awesome. Well, let's be a little bit more critical about the context around that as well, because I think we need to be fair. We also need to be fair that way.
In terms of just talking East here real quick before we get out, who do you have, for the semis? Alouettes have been a little bit more of a roller coaster. Hamilton coming on strong here. What do you make?
I like the ceiling for Hamilton better than Montreal, but what I've seen when you see those East on East matchups, Montreal has kind of owned, aside from Toronto, has owned the rest of the East. Like, it's been a pretty clear cut second best team in that division, and Cody Fajardo, as long as he can avoid throwing interceptions, which has been a pretty big question around him this year. But as long as he can avoid throwing interceptions, Montreal has spent most of those games kind of in command of it. Hamilton's been kind of an enigma this year. Like, I expected them to be better and pretty squarely in the thick of that race. Maybe not quite with the Argonauts, but comfortably right in behind them. And it just hasn't quite worked out that way. Orlando Steinauer, once one of the rising stars of this league, that star is dimmed pretty significantly at this point in time. The quarterback question is interesting. Like, it appears that they're trying to go with the 2 quarterback system right now and split time. I don't know how effective that's going to be. It has worked in some cases before, but it's pretty rare where 2 quarterback systems work effectively for a team. It's usually an indication that you don't love either quarterback. And given that you just went out and acquired Bo Levi Mitchell this offseason to settle that question, that's not really where you want to be. But I was really impressed with the way they hung in against BC. They lost on a last second field goal in that game, but I thought for most of the second half in that game, they were the better team of the two. So, that's them playing legitimate playoff caliber football. And if they can keep that up, then maybe they can make a go of it. It'll be an interesting matchup. And Montreal, I would say too, like, their venue isn't necessarily the most hostile environment to go into and win in the league either. Yeah. So I think it's a winnable game for the road team, but I also like what Montreal's done this year when they've been challenged within their conference. They've looked pretty in control of those games throughout. I like what they're doing on defense. I really like Austin Mack. And I think that if they, going with the right mindset, that they should be good, but Hamilton's really come on, like you said. And so I think there's a lot more question marks around the Tiger Cats, but I talked about roster talent before. I do think through and through the Tiger Cats probably are the more talented roster if they can piece it all together.
Last question here for me. Ottawa, disappointing, obviously injury stuff, disappointing last year, obviously injury stuff, like disappointment. Like, what do you make like, going forward here? We write this season off. Like, what do you do from here? Because it's been a long time before they've seen any success.
I mean, I think you write this season off, but I do think that you take a critical review of Bob Dice and his staff and decide whether he's the guy moving forward. I didn't love. He sounds like he's a very well-respected guy and a good players coach and that kind of stuff. But I just, given the way the previous era in Ottawa went, I was a little surprised that they hired from within. There's also been some rumblings that the level of financial investment in this roster has not really been up to par with the rest of the league as well. And that's something that I think OSEG and the ownership group is going to have to take a hard look in the mirror and review, because I wonder if, and this is purely me spitballing, I don't have insider information here, but I do wonder if there's maybe a little bit of complacency selling in from OSEG, in that in the Red Blacks era, they've managed to carve out a pretty darn good thing in Ottawa. That venue is excellent. The fan base is really supportive. They have a great atmosphere pretty much all the time. And they've tested it with not putting great teams on the field the last couple of years, and it's held up reasonably well. But I don't know how much further they can push it. I think they really need to buckle down and get things figured out. I think they thought that they were doing that by bringing in a guy like Jeremiah Masoli to kind of carry the load, but that didn't work out. I don't know if he'll be able to come back and help them out next year either. So they kind of have to get back to the drawing board. But the thing that's very clear with Ottawa is that, once Masoli was out, it was kind of exposed that this roster's, without him, probably the worst in the league. And they really need to address that. And that doesn't have to cost you a lot of money, but you have to invest in things like effective scouting and the amateur draft and stuff like that, and squeeze more out of that stone if you're going to make a go of it. They're certainly capable of doing so, but I don't know if that level of desperation seems to be there to the extent that it would be in other markets after consecutive seasons like the Red Blacks have had the last couple of years. And so I wonder how quickly that'll change.
Well, I appreciate that. I like that. Good insights there. Because, I get kind of different opinions on that, because it's like, oh, Sean Burke, and so it's good to hear that. Gord, I appreciate it, taking time here in the middle of work and everything else, and that really makes, I appreciate it, and we'll hope that the Lions here, whatever ends up with that, they can go in here. I kind of felt like that was the end of the season here a couple weeks ago, but we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll see. That was a tough one to lose, but hey, they bounced back and won a tough road game last week. They're still fighting. I am very confident they'll end up in Winnipeg for that Western final. I'm not super confident they'll get through that, but I'm going to tune in to see. So,
Gord, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Of course, you take care, man.
Really appreciate all of our guests for coming on today. Paul Reeths, as always, making himself available with all the other work he does, tracking all of these alternative football leagues, running OurSports Central, and his family, everything else means a lot. And then, like I said, Jamie and I taking time after work, looking forward to seeing him up in Hamilton here for the Grey Cup in just a few weeks. And then Gord Randall, as always, making time, Krown, Gridiron Nation, all of that. Jim Mullen and our friends, Mike Hogan, everyone over there, super appreciate Gord with that. Working on getting our location solidified for our Grey Cup show. Can you believe TSN? We were at the George Hamilton 2 years ago, across the street from the convention center, almost like the perfect location to do a live show. I called them up. TSN rented the entire venue the entire weekend. So hopefully that means we'll have friends nearby. We can bring them on the program as well, but getting all that figured out for our CFL Grey Cup show here coming up on November 18th, just about a month away. Like I said, like and subscribe. Hope you guys enjoy. Should be news coming here soon. Lots of stuff happening, swirling. Hearing lots of rumors with this XFL, USFL, UFL, United Football stuff. So make sure you're subscribed. Like I said, stay tuned, and we'll see you next time. Have a good weekend. Thanks.